Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And These Are Your Stories. So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by science.
Joke?
Just a quote from Isaac Asimov.
Let's hear it.
The saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom.
He sure was right about that.
Yes, city editor.
Is Tom Jackson?
Yes, who's this?
Keep this under your hat, Jackson, and you'll have a front-page story.
What is this, a gag?
You won't think so when I tell you this is Rocky Stebbins.
Well, and where have you been hiding out? You know the whole police force is looking for you?
Yeah, I know.
Did you pull off that job at the bank and kill that guard?
That's what I want to see you about. I had nothing to do with it. And I want your paper to print the story. Can I come up and see you?
Sure. What have I got to lose except my job? Anyone see you come in here, Stebbins?
Not a soul. I even doubled back to make sure. Now, you're a square guy, Jackson, and I'm telling you the facts. I got an alibi.
Yeah, let's hear your dream.
The bank job was pulled off at 2 o'clock, see? At that time, I'm someplace else.
Any witnesses?
I got a silent witness.
Yeah, who?
It ain't a who, it's a what. I saw the explosion and the fire at the United Oil Company tanks this afternoon.
Yeah, where were you when they blew up?
I was up on top of Lookout Mountain when I saw the whole thing happen.
What was the exact time the explosions began?
It was 2:15. You know, I couldn't get from the bank to the mountain in 15 minutes.
Yeah, not very well. More than 10 miles to the foot of the mountain, and then that walk uphill takes a good half hour.
And how?
But why would I believe that you were on top of that mountain when the United States tanks blew up?
I can give you an eyewitness description.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, it was such a swell day that I decided to spend the afternoon on the mountain looking out at the sights.
Cut it out, Rocky. Get to the explosion.
Okay. Well, I'm looking south, see, away from the tanks at the time it happens. All of a sudden, I start hearing some blasting. I turn around quick to the tanks, and some more explosions is tearing the air apart. But I don't see nothing. After one more blast, I suddenly see flames and smoke start pouring up from the tanks. Then some more explosions, then some more fire. It was the most horrible thing I ever seen in my whole life. My ears was coming off.
Yeah, so are mine right now.
Huh? What do you mean?
Simply that your alibi is the biggest cock and bull story I've heard in a long time. Now stay where you are, Rocky. I'm calling the police.
What mistake did Rocky Stebbins make in the telling of his alibi? In just a moment we'll know, but first...
So, BG, what do you know about the physics of sound propagation?
Sound is a sequence of waves of pressure which propagates through compressible media such as air or water.
Very good.
Why do you ask?
Well, that's the answer to our mystery today.
You are suggesting that Rocky's alibi can be solved with science.
No, I'm saying that there are only bad science jokes left.
Oh, really?
All the good ones are gone.
Ron, you are amazing.
Why, thank you.
It was not a compliment.
And now, back to our mystery.
You were doing fine until you hit the climax of your story. Then it fell apart completely. You forgot one little fact that every schoolboy learns. The scientific law that light travels faster than sound.
So what?
So you said that first you heard the explosions and then you saw the fire, which, my friend, is an impossibility. Light goes at the speed of 186,000 miles per second, while sound only travels 700 miles per hour. The fire would have been seen first, and the explosions heard a few seconds later.
Guy ain't got a chance. If it ain't one kind of law, it's another.
Well, all science aside, that is the worst alibi I've ever heard.
Agreed. It doesn't offer any proof and is, well, really dumb.
Message, BG?
None that I am aware of.
Well, back on the science thing, I'm reading a great book on anti-gravity.
Oh?
I can't put it down. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. On the show this time, we're going to have some fun with science when I review the audiobook, A Grown-Up Guide to Planet Earth. Then, it's Bigfoot Week. Why call it that? Well, that's because we have 3 stories from you that are all about the big guy. We will end this show with a story from the 1950s pulp magazine scene titled Invasion. Now, if you were to judge this one by the title, you might think this is your typical alien conquering story. That is not what we have. This is a fresh look at an old story. So let's get to the show. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Audible has sponsored the show now since July of 2019. We have reviewed more than 140 audiobooks, and the list keeps growing. Did you know that Audible has over 200,000 books available? And a lot of those are included in the free catalog. Audible is amazing, and it is the perfect companion to Ron's Amazing Stories. If you like this podcast, you're going to love Audible. So what am I listening to? A Grown-Up Guide to Planet Earth by Professor Christopher Jackson. Audible takes you on a journey through the Earth to experience our planet in a way never encountered before. A Grown-Up Guide to Planet Earth is a tour of our world from the inside out. Geologist Chris Jackson plunges into the molten world beneath our feet to our world reaching up to the edges of space. You'll discover how all these layers combine to make the planet Earth the perfect, as far as we know, the only place in the universe that's home to complex life. The audiobook is narrated by Professor Jackson himself. And I gotta tell you, this is one captivating story. Here's a clip from the book.
I'm looking at a very special picture of the Earth. It was taken from the Voyager 1 space probe on the 14th of February 1990, from a distance of 6 billion miles. And there, in the top right corner, set against a jet black background, is a pale blue dot. That dot, a single pixel big, is planet Earth. From a human perspective, the Earth is huge, but looking at it in this picture, it's tiny. It's the only place in the universe that we know has life. That's thanks to a unique set of geological processes that have played out over billions of years. And in this series, we'll discover what they are and why they matter. I'm Professor Chris Jackson. I'm a geoscientist at the University of Manchester, and this is A Grown-Up Guide to Planet Earth, an Audible original. In this series, I'm going to share with you my fascination with the planet we call home. I'll take you on a unique journey that you've never experienced before to show you just how amazing our planet is. We'll start off by diving into the Earth's superheated core, rising into the misunderstood mantle, before erupting through the constantly changing crust out onto the Earth's surface. We'll then take off into the atmosphere, the very thing that makes all that life possible. We end by looking ahead, predicting what future geologists might make of the time we are living through now. It's a journey through time as well as space, with each layer telling its own story about our planet.
That may not do justice to what you're going to hear. For example, in one discussion, the professor describes the aurora borealis. You know, that system that lights up the northern skies. Truly a wonder to see, but how do you describe that in an audiobook? I would have thought it impossible, but by using live audio, the professor puts you right in the middle along with his toddler children. A remarkable piece of audio. This original podcast is 6 episodes in total and begins with Episode 1, Journey from the Center of the Earth. This one takes you to the outer edges of the atmosphere, born in the hidden processes happening deep inside the Earth's core. Then, in Episode 2, The Earth Erupts, it discusses volcanic eruptions that can be quite beautiful and mesmerizing, or explosive and disastrous. And Episode 3, The Earth Moves, talks about earthquakes that rock our planet. The last 3 take on the living Earth, the Earth Breathes, and the human Earth. At the time I'm recording this, I haven't listened to those yet, so can't tell you about it, but I can't wait to finish this series. This series is excellent. It's broken up into half-hour episodes of information in a way that's easy to comprehend so you don't get overwhelmed, but still evokes awe, inspiration, and amazement. A while back in RAS number 402, I reviewed a grown-up guide to dinosaurs. If you listen to that one, you're going to love this one. And from what I understand, there's going to be another in the series that focuses on our oceans. I'm looking forward to that one as well. Now, if any of that appeals to you, head to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you can have a grown-up guide to the planet Earth for free. Here is what Audible has set up for us. They are offering a free audiobook and 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out their service. This also grants you access to the included catalog, which is updated constantly with new titles. So to download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Thank you, Audible. And now it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
This time we feature stories about Bigfoot. Our first one comes to us via Pennsylvania from Jake Waters. I read this one exactly as it was sent to me. Hello, Ron. I have a fishing story for you, and I hope you can use it on the show. It's a real encounter with Bigfoot, and I have to say it changed how I feel about them things. I can add more depth and character names if you want. I'm fishing at the Cadogan. It's on the Allegheny River in western Pennsylvania. So I park at the top of the ramp going down to the river. Not a boat ramp, just one of those for backing four-wheel drives down to the water. I go up and it's getting to be about twilight when I hear something coming down the hillside across from us. It's steep, but not too steep. Anyway, I hear it barreling down the hillside, but the brush is so thick and really high, better part of 12 feet. Now, I'm waiting for a black bear to hop onto the road, but it doesn't. It just stops in the middle of the last bush right beside the road. Thinking it was still a bear, I go ushering my friend and his 4-year-old daughter back down to the river. There's a bunch of rocks down there from baseball to basketball size so they can defend themselves. I'm still up at the car because I'm less than 5 feet from my door and the brush is a good 30 feet away, so I know I can make it to my car and distract them with my horn. Yet it never leaves the brush. It just shakes it violently. I stand there for about 5 minutes, and I can see it's making its way back up the hill. What I didn't realize was that it was pushing trees around it. About 20 feet tall they were. I'm pretty sure I wasn't connecting anything because of my adrenaline. I never seen it. It was too dark by that point. I walk back down to the river and we're gathering our stuff. It's getting way too creepy. We were packing up and I hear a knocking coming from the hillside. I could see a group of people downriver, but they weren't near any trees. They were actually on an outcrop about 20 feet away from the tree line. The knocking was above us and slightly upriver. And even if they had reacted to it, looking around and whatnot, I decided to yell to them about the possibility of there being a bear. They said that they had heard something coming down the hillside and seen my buddy running towards the water. They thanked us for the heads up. As soon as they thanked us, a rock came flying off the hillside in between us and them. We actually seen it hit the water. They jumped as I did, because we weren't really expecting it. I turned around to see if my friend was up the hill and was just messing with us. As I turned, I saw that he was just a few feet behind me holding his daughter. Both were as white as a ghost. I guess none of us were expecting that. I decided to reach down and grab a rock and carried it with me just in case it got real. 3 more times we heard these rocks hitting the water, and I had had enough. Our site was all cleaned up, and I took it as a perfect time to retaliate. Not my best decision. I knew where the rocks were being thrown from, that darn bush up there. So I chucked it. I knew there weren't any trees around, so I figured if I threw it, it'd probably just blow right through. But it didn't. It made a thud sound like it hit someone on their chest, and then that darn rock rolled right back towards me. I actually heard whatever I hit get the wind knocked out of it. Then the thing takes off down the road towards the other group. They started screaming. And I mean being threatened with other terror kind of scream, and start throwing whatever they could grab at it. I'm just standing there bewildered and watching them scatter. A few went into the water, and the rest ran towards me. All of a sudden, I hear one of them yell, "Get in the truck!" Now, they took off to their truck, and I mean when I say they left everything, nobody grabbed anything, and they took off. I'll never forget their screams. I ran back up the hill and hopped in my car. My buddy ran up with his daughter right after they started shouting. He was crying. Now, I've known this man for 20 years, and I can count on one hand how many times I've seen him cry. I started up my car, and we hightailed it out of there. I never seen what it was, but I put everything together later that night. It's been 5 years since it happened, and I absolutely refuse to ever go back down there. It's a damn shame, too, because it's a great catfishing spot. Jake Waters from Pennsylvania. Jake, that has to be one of the coolest Bigfoot stories we've ever had on the show. As I've said before, I have a fondness for these type of stories, and I want to thank you for sharing it with us. And by the way, I don't think it needs any more depth. You are an amazing storyteller. Our next Bigfoot story comes from my own backyard. It was sent in by Rich Snyder, who lives in Pasco, Washington. Rich writes, "Hey Ron, I heard you talking about Bigfoot, and I have a story that took place a few years ago. We were out in the Pinchot National Forest. I was with a small group of friends, and all of us experienced what I'm about to tell you. On June 22nd, 2009, we were driving on a curvy road off Highway 14 when a large humanoid walked out of the forest. I swerved to miss it and glanced back in my rearview mirror and saw someone or something darting back into the forest. A moment later, we stopped and turned around and got a 3 to 4 second glimpse of something walking on 2 feet about 50 feet away. He was about 7 or 8 foot tall, covered with black hair and possessing broad, muscular shoulders. A moment later, we all heard a scream that came from the area where it had disappeared. I felt nervous, confused, and excited, all at the same time. Up until this point, I thought Bigfoot to be much ado about nothing. Today, I am a believer. Rich Schneider, Pasco, Washington. Thank you, Rich. I know the area that you spoke of, and that place is Bigfoot Central. I've heard many credible stories like yours come from that area. One from a close friend who experienced nearly word for word your story. There just has to be something to all of this. There just has to be. Our last Bigfoot story comes from Lowell Rice. He writes to us from Gresham, Oregon. Hello, Ron. Here's a story that happened a few summers ago. The year was 1963. I had to go to California with my family. I didn't want to go, but I didn't have a choice. My uncle rented us a cabin at Big Bear Lake for a week as a family Christmas present. On our last night at Big Bear, my aunt took my mother, my sister, and me to the movies in town. The movie was over around 5 p.m., and we headed back to the cabin. Once we arrived, I realized I didn't have my wallet. I asked my aunt to drive me back to the movie theater, and she refused to take me. So I decided to walk to town to see if I could find my wallet. When I arrived at the movie theater, I asked the girl at the ticket booth if I could go look for my wallet. She gave me permission to enter the theater to look, and to my surprise, I found it stuck in the seat. When I came back outside, it was dark. Something I didn't think of when I left the cabin. There was only one way back, so off I went. It was a gravel road that ran up the side of the mountain. I was walking along and I started to hear something moving on my left. It was the sound of branches snapping when you step on them. The terrain on the right side of the road was a steep hill upward with a lot of thick trees and underbrush. On the left side of the road was a steep angle going down. There weren't any trees, but a lot of bushes and underbrush. It'd be very hard for a human to climb without slipping. That was where the sound was coming from. When I stopped, they would stop. When I started to walk again, the branches started snapping again. As kids, we always carried stones in our pockets, in case we ran into trouble. I started to lob them into the air so that they would fall on whatever was down there. Then the breaking of the branches became more ominous. When I stopped to listen this time, the thing just kept coming up the side. The road went off to the right about 20 yards ahead of me. At the speed this thing was moving, I wouldn't make it to the bend. I told myself, there's no way I'm going to let this thing get by me. I started to run. God must have been with me because a car came around the bend. I stood right in the middle of the road doing jumping jacks. It slammed on its brakes and stopped with only a foot to spare. My aunt was driving with my mother and sister in the car. They had come looking for me. I ran to the side of the car, got in, and said, "Let's go!" As we drove away, I looked out the back window, and I saw a large creature which had to be 7 feet tall, standing in the middle of the road. I didn't tell anyone about this at that time because I was too shook up. My sister knew something was wrong just by the look on my face. I didn't tell my sister the whole story until we got back home to Oregon. Lowell Rice, Gresham, Oregon. What a great story, Lowell. I have to say, to go through that as a kid would be tough. Thank you for being part of Bigfoot Week, and thank you for your story. Our featured story comes from the pages of Super Science Fiction, October edition, 1958. For generations, they had wandered about the universe looking for a planet on which to settle. And now, at long last, they seem to have found a suitable home. But who owns this planet? And what will it take to invade it? The story is titled Invasion, and it was written by Arthur Bertram Chandler. It is expertly read for us by Dan Gurzynski. Take it away, Dan.
Rogerez and Suzette were in their tiny cabin about to retire when the bulkhead speaker coughed twice and then began to talk in a crisp, authoritative voice. "This is the captain speaking," it said. "The Department of Astrophysics has just informed me that the star that we are approaching has a family of 10 planets, as well as many satellites and planetoids. It is possible that our voyage is over. In any case, we have been ordered by the Commodore to make the preliminary investigations. If our findings are hopeful, the main fleet will be diverted to this system. All departmental heads will report at once to control. That is all." Rogerez, who was halfway out of his trunks, pulled them on again. He got back into the shirt that carried the silver-crossed quill pens on its epaulets. He slid his feet into his sandals. Suzette sat on the bunk and watched him. Her thin, fine-featured face was thoughtful and serious under the pale yellow hair. "Raj," she said, "do you think that this is the real thing this time?" "It could be," he said. "It could be." She smiled faintly. "But you're the chronicler, and you keep the records, and you have access to the records of the chroniclers before you. You could tell me just how many sterile balls of rock or mud or water we've investigated since the beginning of the exile." "I could," he said. "I advise you, Sue, not to get any false hopes." "But the captain said that it was possible that our voyage was over," she said. "What will it be like to live on the surface of a planet, with room to stretch? What will it be like to have all the food we want, instead of rations? All the water we want? What will it be like to be a real gardener, a real farmer, not a biochemist dabbling with seeds and shoots in tanks full of chemicals? What will it be like to be able to have children when we want to, not when some damn committee decides it's our turn to be parents?" "I hope," he said, "that you find out, that we find out. But I must get along to control." "One departmental head in the family is one too many," she said, smiling. "I wish that you could stay with me to hear the news as it's released." "So do I," he said. He kissed her briefly, opened the door, and almost ran out into the alleyway. He was the last to reach control. All the others were already there. Captain Maris, Kane, the chief officer, Blish and Cat, the 2 chief engineers, Crandall, the communications officer, Deal, who commanded the ground forces, Hain, the surgeon, Pamel, the biochemist, Claver, the purser, Keene, the astrophysicist. Rogerez stood in the doorway looking at them, at the men and women who were the rulers of this little man-made world. He looked beyond them to the banked instruments and controls, to the big screens upon which the stars were, to the layman, meaningless swirls and eddies of light against the blackness. He tried to get the feel of the occasion, began to toy with the phrases that he would use when writing his official account. "Sit down, man," snapped Captain Maris. "Don't interrupt his train of thought, sir," said Pamel cattily. "Who knows what beautiful purple prose is running through his mind?" Rogerez glared at her, but said nothing. After all, she was Suzette's chief, and could make life hard for her. He took his seat at the foot of the long conference table. "It's been worn shiny," he thought, "by the elbows of generations. It's old, and the ship is old, and we are growing old with her. Will there never be an end to this voyaging?" "Keene," said the captain, "tell us of your findings." "With your permission," said the astrophysicist. "The interstellar drive was shut down and observations made. The 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th, 6th, and 5th planets seem to be utterly incapable of supporting life as we know it. It would be barely possible to establish a colony on the 4th planet. We have not yet been able to decide whether or not the second planet is suitable. The first planet would be most unsuitable. "Come to the point, man," said Colonel Deal impatiently. "On my own time, Deal," replied Keene. After the preliminary observations, our attention was concentrated upon the third planet. Its mass is almost identical with that of the home world. So is the relative distribution of land and water. The same may be said for atmospheric density and composition. "Is it inhabited?" asked Deal. "There is life," replied the scientist. "Pamel will bear me out on that." "Is there intelligent life?" asked the soldier. "That does not concern us yet, Deal," said Captain Maris. "My instructions from the Commodore are to make the preliminary survey from a safe orbit. No landing is to be attempted until the arrival of the main fleet. If there is intelligent life, we shall not strike until we are ready." "Need there be war, Captain?" asked Hayne. "Might it not be possible to establish friendly relations with the natives?" "Was it possible," asked Maris, "when the Glormingen landed on our homeworld?" "Between different races, there is only one possible state of affairs: war. Our world was taken from us by force. We shall take a new world by force." "I am ready," said Deal quietly. He looked around the table, a small, hard smile on his hard face. "He sees us all carrying guns, manning his artillery," thought Rogerez. After years of playing at soldiers, of studying strategy and tactics, he sees a chance of achieving what he thinks is his proper place in the scheme of things. "Cat," asked the captain, "how are your rockets?" "Ready, Captain," replied the reaction engineer. "They are always ready. My fuel tanks were refilled, as you know, only 20 years ago. The only consumption since then has been for the annual tests. Claver, in the unlikely event of our being ordered to send down a landing party before the arrival of the main fleet, how are your boat provisions?" "All boats are fully stocked," said the purser, "as always." "She looks," thought Rogerez, "like a plump, competent housewife in the old stories. And that, with any luck at all, is what she will be soon, with her own little home to worry about, and not a ship." "Rogerez," Maris went on, "I suppose that your records are up to date?" "They are, sir." "Then get them transmitted to the flagship for recording, and make it, from now on, a half-daily routine. Crandall, is all your equipment in good order?" "It is, Captain." "Keep it so. The Commodore must be kept informed of everything. Everything." "How much can we tell the people, Captain?" asked Claver. "I realize the dangers of raising false hopes, but there has been considerable despondency of late." "You can tell them," said Maris, "that we have found our new world. You can tell them, too, that we may have to fight for it." "We shall have to fight," said Rogerez. "Put me in the picture," said Suzette. "Nobody ever tells us anything in hydroponics. That bitch Pamel knows what's going on, but it'd break her heart to pass on information. What's the use of having a husband who's chronicler if I can't get inside information?" "This is inside information," said Rogerez. "For some reason, the old man's decided to keep it secret. This is rather too big for him to handle, and he's waiting for instructions from the Commodore. As you know, we're in an orbit around the third planet. It's all that astrophysics said it was. Mass, atmosphere, climate, and all the rest just right. But it's inhabited. We can see the city lights gleaming from the night hemisphere. Crandall has been able to pick up what seem to be radio broadcasts. Voice is talking in some odd language. Weird music. This much we know for certain. These people have electricity, and they have radio. It's fairly certain that they haven't spaceflight. There are no signs of colonization on their satellite. But even so, their technological level is uncomfortably high. They may have atomic power. The scientists are still trying to make up their minds about that. What harm can it do if the people do know? Plenty. If the Commodore decides to carry on without making a landing, an attempt at conquest, think of the disappointment. There might be mutiny even. The technique for handling such a situation has to be worked out. I have a good mind, she flared, to go out into the alleyways, the public rooms, and shout what you've told me throughout the ship. As wife of the chronicler, he told her, you've taken the oath of loyalty and secrecy. This is more important than any oath, she snapped. It is not. The lights flickered. What was that? She demanded. Crandall's taking some more readings of the native radio signals, she said. They've had to switch off the meteor screen. Isn't that dangerous? No, the chances of our being struck are infinitesimal. The lights went out. Rogerez realized that he was on the deck with Suzette in his arms. He was deafened by the concussions that had slammed through the huge hull, heard only faintly the thudding shut of airtight doors, the thin, high scream of escaping atmosphere. Somebody was whispering. It was, he realized, the bulkhead speaker. Spacesuits! Put on your spacesuits! The ship is holed! Another voice was heard. There aren't enough, you fool! Attention all! Attention all! This is the chief officer. The captain is dead. I am in command. The ship has been badly damaged. All navigation personnel will report to control. All engineering personnel to the engine room. The rest of you stay in your cabins and dormitories and prepare for landing. Prepare for landing. There will be a brief period of weightlessness when the ship's revolution about her axis is halted. Weight will return with deceleration. Secure everything. Secure yourselves. Rogerez got unsteadily to his feet, pulled Suzette to hers. Together, groping blindly in the darkness, they found the bunk, fell into it, strapped themselves in. They heard the roar as the rockets were fired, felt the dizziness that came when the rotation slowed and halted, when centrifugal force no longer played the part of gravity. Then, after what could have been either centuries or seconds, weight returned as the ship shook to the blasting of the rockets. Deceleration, said Rogerez. We are going down, came Kane's voice from the speaker. Again the rockets fired, and again. There was the whine of the gyroscopes as the ship was turned. There was the thin, barely heard keening of the first tenuous wisps of atmosphere along her sides. There was the screaming roar, the ear-piercing whistle, as the air through which they were rushing found the holes punctured in the sleekness by the meteor swarm. The ship was tilting, and Rogerez was afraid until he realized what had been down could no longer be down. That Kane was turning her again so that she was approaching the planetary surface stern first, dropping down and down the long column of fire of her exhausts. Creaking, protesting, the long untried mechanism of the bunk adjusted itself to the change of conditions. Somewhere children were crying and a man was swearing. The roar of the rockets was steady now, drowning all other noises. More frightening than any sound was the shuddering of the ship. She was old, thought Rogerez, and the metal of her parts must, over the centuries, have crystallized. She was old, and the damage caused by the meteor swarm must have weakened her still further. He tried to visualize the scene in control. Kane and his officers intent over their instruments, the body of the captain flung carelessly and unregarded in some corner. Was it in daylight that they were coming down, he wondered, or was it at night? Was it clear air that they were dropping through, or cloud and storm? One of the rockets was faltering, stammering. Suzette cried out in fear as the ship tilted again. Rogerez held her tightly to him. He was muttering to himself, "Fire, you bastard! Fire, you bastard!" Another rocket cut out, and the ship righted. "If we could only see what was happening," cried Suzette. "We can guess," said Rogerez. "We're coming down on 6 jets instead of 8. Kane had to cut one of the good ones to counterbalance the bad one." Again there was the uneven, terrifying hammering. Again the ship tilted. Again she righted. and the diminution of the rocket's thunder was more frightening than the tilting had been. "Control here," came Kane's voice. "We are coming down too fast for a safe landing. I am trying to bring her down in what appears to be a body of calm water. Be ready to throw off your safety belts the moment we touch. The ship is badly holed and will not stay afloat for long. Get ready to abandon ship as soon as we touch." Rogers remembered how, at every council meeting, there had been those who had maintained that the space occupied by the ship's swimming pool could be put to much better use. He was glad that they had never been able to carry their point. She hit, not too hard, and there was a great hissing and bubbling as her incandescent exhausts boiled the water around her. She went down and down, and then, swaying gently, floated to the surface. Rogers unsnapped the buckles of the belt holding Susette and himself to the bunk. He jumped down onto what had been a bulkhead and was now the deck. He managed to open the sliding door. There were dim emergency lights burning in the alleyway outside, and they were shining on the crowds of people making their way to the axial shaft. There was little panic, but there was a determination to get out of the ship as soon as possible. Rogers knew that should he or Susette fall, they would never be able to get up again. He took her hand and tucked it in the waistband of his trunks. All they could do thereafter was go with the crowd. The alleyway had been crowded, but the axial shaft was almost jammed. Rogers and Susette were pushed into it by the crush behind them, then went up it almost without touching the ladder rungs. Below them were gurglings and splashings, sounds that told of the encroachment of water into the ship. There was an occasional cry, an occasional curse. Somewhere with idiot persistence a speaker was repeating, "Abandon ship! Abandon ship!" Then Rogers and Susette were at the forward airlock. There was no holding back, no chance of a pause to evaluate, to decide upon a plan of action. They were swept through the little compartment by the press of bodies behind them until in a matter of seconds the deck was gone from beneath their feet and they were falling. The chronicler glimpsed gray sky and tall, incredibly tall trees looming through the mist as he fell. And then all was blotted out by the water. He fought viciously to free himself from the entwining arms and legs of those who had fallen with him, after him. He broke surface at last, coughing and sputtering. He looked around him frantically until he saw Susette's pale hair and paler face. Together they struck out for the dark line of the shore. Kane, aided by Deal and Claver, called the roll. Rogers, his stylus and notebook were little the worse for their immersion, wrote down the figures after them. We were lucky. 7 men, including the captain, 5 women, and 16 children died in the meteor shower. 3 men, 8 women, and 6 children are missing, presumed drowned, after the landing. Over 1,000 of our ship's company have survived. Lucky, demanded Deal, who was holding the hand lamp while Rogers wrote. Lucky, you say? All of our heavy weapons have been lost with the ship. With them, we could have destroyed a city. He turned to Kane. As for you, why couldn't you have landed near one of their cities? Why couldn't you have landed on solid ground? If I had, replied Kane, we'd have been lucky to have had 10 survivors, and the people of the city could have finished us off with ease. I got us here. I did my job. You're in charge now, soldier. Let's see what you can do. All right, snapped D. All non-military officers will get the people formed into a column, at the head of which I shall place my own men. We shall march, he consulted his compass, west. I suppose that this planet has got a magnetic field, Kane. It has. All right, we march west, away from the lake. We must get out of this damn jungle as soon as possible. For all we know, it's teeming with night predators. At sunrise, which shouldn't be far off, we halt to take stock. Why not wait until sunrise before marching? Because I say so, snapped Deal. Get the people organized and we'll make a start. What about a rear guard? Asked Kane. Are you trying to teach me my business? Demanded the soldier. Nevertheless, Roger has noted that he made arrangements for both a rear guard and flanking parties. Whistles sounded, and the long column began its march. The chronicler, with Suzette, took his place with Kane at the head of the civilians. As he walked, he looked around him, trying to make out as much as possible in the dim, misty light. He could see little beyond the tall, straight stems, many times the height of a man, between which they threaded their way. Now and again there were other, thicker trunks, and the tops of the growths supported by them were lost in the mist. Roots, like cables over the ground, made going difficult. Ahead of the column, Deal was blowing his whistle, a series of short, urgent blasts. Kane repeated the signal with his whistle. It was repeated again by the other officers. There were cries of alarm and apprehension as the march halted. There's something there, whispered Kane to Rogerez. Do you hear it? There was something there ahead, something that crashed through the jungle toward them, something big. Rogerez saw it in the glare of the soldiers' hand lamps. It was huge and spiny, and the mouth in that long pointed face was open, showing sharp, yellow teeth. Its black eyes glared at them hungrily. Fire! Shouted Deal. The rattle of the handguns was deafening. Blinded, the beast reared up, its taloned forepaws scrambling at its ruined eyes. Fire! Shouted Deal again. The bullets tore into its soft underbelly. It screamed deafeningly, fell on its side, flattening the tall, spear-like growths. It screamed again and jerked convulsively. It was dead. Walking slowly, Deal came back to confer with Kane. This was supposed to be a civilized world, he said bitterly. How do you account for that? Even on our own planet, replied Kane, there were vast areas of primitive jungle at the time of the invasion. You yourself said that we should be on our guard against night predators. I didn't expect anything quite so big, said the soldier. I didn't expect something that it would take all my firepower to dispose of. You disposed of it, said the chief officer. Yes, but ammunition isn't unlimited. I hope that anything else we meet will be of a size that we can handle with our machetes. Roger has left them talking, walked with Suzette to look at the dead animal. He didn't like what he saw. The spiny body armor suggested that it must have enemies bigger and fiercer than itself. He examined one of the smaller spikes. His hand would just fit comfortably around the base of it. Deal, he shouted. Yes, Rogerez, come here a minute, will you? What is it? Asked the soldier. First of all, said Rogerez, there must be bigger animals than this one around. It's built for defense rather than for attack. We can assume that it feeds on beasts smaller than itself, such as ourselves. It can supply us with weapons against such creatures. How? Don't you ever read military history? Pikes, man! Pikes! The sun was up, but the mist persisted, looming gigantic on either side. Towering high above what he had called in his notes the spear trees were other growths, seeming to reach to the very sky itself. Ahead of them was the vague silhouette of what could only be a mountain, but a mountain constructed on improbable geometrical lines, in whose sheer sides gleamed enormous sheets of some highly polished material that reflected the almost level rays of the sun. Volcanic, grunted Kane, and Rogerez agreed, but in his mind he wasn't sure. Then they were out of the jungle and crossing a wide, bare clearing, stumbling and slipping a little on the coarse gravel. Deal ordered a detour. He did not, he said, like the looks of tunnels that run down into the earth at a steep angle. There was something artificial about them, he said. Suddenly, the nearer of the tunnels erupted, a swarm of glistening red bodies that deployed rapidly over the plain, that closed in on the advance guard with a pincer movement. Rogerez was shocked to see that they were not humanoid, that they ran on all 6 of their jointed legs. that their weapons were their vicious laterally hinged jaws. Calmly, with deliberation, the soldiers were firing, at first. Then, in spite of Deal's shouts, an element of hysteria crept into their fighting. These natives were so hard to kill, pressed on to the attack with their legs missing and half their bodies shot away. Kane took charge of the rest of the column. "Children in the center," he bellowed. "The rest of you, form a tight ring. Use your pikes." The maneuver was accomplished, although not without confusion, not without casualties. Kane was dead, his head ripped from his shoulders. Claver was dead, her body cut in two. Deal, Rodriguez noted as he fended off attack with his pike, was down. The air was heavy with the odor of spilled blood and the acrid stench of the ichor flowing from the bodies of the natives. The worst of it was that there were so many of them. In a seemingly inexhaustible stream, they flowed from their tunnels, rushed to the attack over the bodies of their comrades. The soldiers had exhausted their ammunition, were fighting with machetes and spears. The handful of them who survived retreated to the main body. Rodriguez was bleeding, his shirt ripped from his body by a serrated claw. It seemed that he had been fighting for an eternity, that all he had ever known, ever would know, was the thrusting of the point of his pike into the soft joints of body armor between gaping, clashing mandibles. Beside him, Suzette had lost her spear. It had been bitten clean in two and was wielding a machete taken from a dead soldier. Rodriguez realized dimly that it had been all of 5 minutes since he had used his spear. He looked around him. The tunnel mouths gaped black and empty. On the blood-stained gravel were the bodies of men and women, the bodies of the enemy. The human corpses were still. Those of the natives were not. Clawed legs twitched jerkily. Sharp mandibles still opened and shut viciously. "Rodriguez," somebody was saying, "what do we do now?" "Ask Deal," he said. "Ask Kane." But Deal was dead, and with him his junior officers and his sergeants. Kane was dead, and the purser was dead, and the engineers had died during the landing. As chronicler, Rodriguez ranked as an officer. In the past, he had enjoyed the privileges of rank. He had never thought that he would have to accept the responsibilities. He said, "Find all the handlights that are still working. Collect all the machetes and the shorter spears. We are going down into the city." "But the natives?" "Will never be safe until we have a fortified place of our own. The natives must have sent all their soldiers out against us. Killing the rest should be easy." It wasn't easy, but it was not as hard as Rodriguez had anticipated. There was fighting in the tunnels and passages, and there were more casualties, but they were not heavy ones. It was in the very heart of the city that the stiffest resistance was encountered, and there, in a huge chamber, 20 guards put up a desperate and stubborn defense. They went down at last, hacked to pieces by the machete-men. Rodriguez looked at the bulk of the being whom they had defended so grimly. He looked at the great flaccid body, at the faceted eyes that glinted in the light of the hand lamps that glared into his. "Kill it," he ordered. The pikes drove home. "What now?" asked Suzette. "This will be our headquarters," said Rodriguez. To his men he said, "Drag that thing out of here into that side tunnel. Pass word that I want all the natives' bodies dragged out and buried, and the bodies of our own people brought inside before some vile scavenger finds them. We'll make a grave of one of the tunnels. Then I want parties to go through the city to dispose of any survivors and to report to me on the discovery of any records or artifacts or stores or foodstuffs. We've seen no artifacts. There's no artificial lighting even. What about the city lights we saw from our orbit? Civilization and savagery can exist together on the same planet," said Rodriguez. "We landed among savages." He sat on the ground, his back against the wall of the chamber. He was tired, and his wounds were painful. He was thankful for the pain. It kept him awake. He was able to acknowledge the reports of various parties as they told him of the discovery of gardens of fungi, of the finding of a chamber in which in silken bags were loathsome beings that seemed to be the young of the natives. He nibbled a piece of the fungus brought to him by one of the foraging parties, pronounced it edible. It was not unlike the yeast from the ship's vats. At last, with affairs organized to his satisfaction, he felt justified in ordering a general stand-down. Sentries had been posted, and arrangements made to pass messages by word of mouth through the tunnels and passages. Nothing further could be attempted, he knew, until all hands had been refreshed by sleep. Thankfully, he himself sank into unconsciousness with Susette by his side. He was awakened just before the end by a confused bawling. As in a dream, he heard the words screamed rather than shouted. Like mountains walking! There was a dreadful thudding overhead that threatened to crush the underground city. And then the scalding water sweeping through tunnels and chambers, seeping into every last crevice, finished conclusively what had begun by shipwreck and battle. The man cursed as the spines of the dead hedgehog pricked his ankle. He stooped to examine the little body. "Hello," he said. "I wonder what did this?" "Never mind the hedgehog," said his wife. "It's those dreadful ants that I'm after." She stood with the empty kettle in her hand, looking down with satisfaction at the steaming earth around the nest. "There'll be more of them," said her husband pessimistically. End of Invasion by A. Bertram Chandler.
Did you see that end coming? All too often, our point of view distorts us from the truth. Sometimes it can even be fatal. This story was written by Arthur Bertram Chandler. He was an Australian merchant marine officer, sailing the world in everything from tramp steamers to troop ships. But he later turned his hand to a second career as a prolific author of pulp science fiction. Many of his stories draw on his extensive sailing background, like our story today did. Chandler commanded various ships in the Australian and New Zealand merchant navies, including his service as the last master of the Australian aircraft carrier HMAS Melbourne. By law, the ship was required to have an officer on board while waiting for its towing to China to be broken up. He was the man that took on that duty, and many of his stories reflect that time. Chandler wrote over 40 novels and 200 works of short fiction, winning many awards for his work. And so ends episode number 607. My thanks go out to Jake Waters, Rich Snyder, and Lowell Rice for their contributions to this one. I couldn't have done it without you. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button helps us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.